reach beyond the darkness, beyond the grave, to an unexplored dimension as we travel to the mysterious realm of ghosts. Journey with us into the world of ghost stories. Terrifying tales of a brutal murder and cannibalism still haunt the small town of Rawlins, Wyoming. Although the prison has been closed for the past 15 years, when we visited, we found witnesses who claim this prison is still open and housing former inmates. Our next story asks, could a prisoner's cruel past condemn him to his cell for all eternity? Our story starts here at the Wyoming Frontier Prison, formerly the State Penitentiary. The prison closed in 1981, but some believe the spirits of a few inmates still remain behind the prison walls. Some of the worst murderers in the history of Wyoming spent their last days in the death house before their execution.
This is the death house, and I think this place in history sounds a lot different feels a lot different than any place else in the prison. The one that really scares me is the guy on the back side. This cell belonged to, I think, the worst murder in the history of Wyoming. When we do night tours, his candle always burns brighter or dimmer than any of the others. I don't know, I feel a little uncomfortable talking about him.
There's many times the hair on your back will stand up. You're fully aware that something is there, what you don't know. Pixley is tremendously scary. Even when you're doing tours and you're talking about him, as a tour guide, you always get a sense that this is maybe something you shouldn't be talking about. You'll get the creeps and the willies. And the candles will flicker. His will be straight. The other candles on the night tours will flicker. Definitely, there's definitely something to his story, I'm sure.
The last execution, Andrew Pixley in 1965, he was the youngest guy executed here. He was 22 years old. And when he was executed, they wanted to make sure that there was no leaks in the gas chamber. Usually they go by a pig, but this time they went out onto the streets of Rawlins and they found a stray black cat, and they executed it. Black cat supposedly haunts the penitentiary. I was running out of A block one night after I came out of the cell, and I was running around and this black cat darted out in front of me. And he went around the corner, and another tour guide, Molly, was waiting for me there, and it darted out in front of her, and it just disappeared. And every once in a while we see him, but he's lurking around every night tour.
The one that scares me is the guy who was in the middle cell, Andrew Pixley. He was 21 years old when he committed the most horrible murder in the history of Wyoming. Family from Chicago on a ski vacation, Jackson Hole. He murdered 2 little girls. There was evidence of cannibalism. The beatings were so horrible. There are elements of Pixley's case that, in my opinion, are almost worse than Jeffrey Dahmer. He had the least witnesses. He had the most ministers. He was praying right at the time of his execution. He was baptized just for his execution.
Andrew Pixley was described as the perfect psychopath. He had no conscience at all. He didn't remember any of the heinous crimes committed when they found him in the room covered with blood. His execution was carried out shortly after midnight, December the 10th, 1965, in the prison gas chamber. Andrew Pixley took longer to die than any other man in the death house.
He lived twice as long as all the others in the gas chamber. They say it takes longer to kill evil, and I'm convinced this guy was pure evil. And I mean, I'm not a big proponent of capital punishment, but this Pixley character, he scares me to death because the crime was so horrible. This is the prison gas chamber. The mechanics of the gas chamber, the warden pulled a pin on the side, dropped this handle. A bag full of cyanide pellets rolled into acid below the chair. Prisoner was unconscious in 10 to 15 seconds. They were all dead within 3 minutes, except for Andrew Pixley. The witnesses were in the back room. For the first execution, there were 47 people in this room. By the time Andrew Pixley was executed in 1965, there were 13 people. They changed the seals around the windows before the execution. And then, as I said before, they test the gas chamber to make sure it's working all right. We don't give tours in December. I'd been sitting in my office, I'd been researching the executions. We were doing a new display on the executions. I had a head full of stories of executions, but I didn't have all the dates, and I came up here, it was getting kind of late, and I needed a flashlight to read the dates of the walls in the hanging room. I was writing to the dates and with my flashlight in hand, and my flashlight drifted over and I caught the black eyes of Andrew Pixley. As I looked deep into his eyes for the first time, I thought, there's something different about this guy. I'd never thought about it before. Something evil, possessed, demonic. At the instant I thought that, I swear to you, I heard something. I didn't recognize it at first, but behind me, I heard the faint sound of crying. Not just crying, young girls crying. And the sound of the crying was coming from the gas chamber. I was scared to death. Fumbling with my keys, I turned around and I'm walking to get out of here as fast as I can. When I got outside, and I thought about this, I mean, why just at that moment did I hear the crying? And why did I hear it then? And then I heard the church bells ringing a few blocks over at the Catholic Church. And the first thing I thought was Andrew Pixley had renounced the Catholic faith shortly before his death. And then I realized it was December 10th, 1965. His execution was just a few minutes after midnight that day.
Andrew Pixley's sentence was death, but his soul is the grim reminder that not all is at peace.
Robbie wasn't touching the cards, and I wasn't touching the cards, and the cards flipped.